I started in dentistry as a dental assistant. I went to an 8-week dental assistant course, and my first position was actually in sterilization. I always tried to find ways to make it better and more efficient, and I always wanted to have a good use of my time. It is unusual for people to do that nowadays. And I hate to say, because we are addicted in a way to social media and to our texts and to our phones. Our intent is to have a positive team experience, just as much so as the patient experience. Our job is to make sure everybody else shines. We had never had an office manager before. Now we've been in business for 45 years, over 45 years, and there was no formal office manager. Now, when we got to a point where we grew, I mean, we had a team of 8 people to 10 people to 20 to 30, now we're at 50 people. There comes to a certain point where you kind of need somebody to be official, to coordinate, to be a quarterback. And, I had gone to Dr. Craig and I said, hey, I would love that opportunity. I want to be able to be the bridge between the front and the back. And he was like, okay, I can really see that we'd have the need for this. And let's craft something that would kind of more represent the type of position that we want to create. Because when you hear the word office manager, I think we all have our idea of what that means. And I think a lot of times when you hear of manager, I think there's more of a negative connotation in general. You think about manager, not just dental specific, but anywhere. And it's typically the person that resolves problems and issues. And when he was like, I don't want it to be just somebody that manages things the way that they currently are, because really what the position represents, especially what we see for ADOM members, is that we are constantly working to make our practices better. We're not wanting to manage them in the current state. We want to optimize them, and optimization isn't just a final checkbox. I don't think you ever fully arrive optimized, that you have to constantly reinvent and to learn and to change as business changes. And so that's kind of where Practice Optimizer came from. And it was also a way, even for me, as I think about it, we all get into our own routines and rhythms. And, every so often when I take a step back or someone asks me about that title, then it allows me to take a look and say, hey, Practice Optimizer, that's right. I need to make sure that I'm currently providing things to my practice that are making it more efficient or better patient experience, better team experience. And so that title evolved. The pathway to get there. I started in dentistry as a dental assistant. I went to an 8-week dental assistant course, so it was like Saturday, quick. I love those courses. It's great because it gives you enough information where you kind of feel like you know a little bit. But to be honest with you, when you come and you step into, to an actual dental practice, I was like a deer in headlights. I was like, I know of this stuff, but I'm new, really new. And, so I came on, and my first position was actually in sterilization. So
Oh,
I was
really?
even
Okay.
dental assistant with a doctor. I started in sterilization. So I worked in sterilization. And within that position, I think that what started to get me recognized is that I always tried to find ways to make it better and more efficient. And I always wanted to have a good use of my time. And I think that it is unusual for people to do that nowadays. And I hate to say, because we are addicted in a way to social media and to our texts and to our phones and that sort of thing. So I think people default when they have a spare minute or spare time to let me see what's going on in the world versus how can I think of ways to add value to my practice.
I just remember that when I was managing, I would walk around, and if I saw somebody sitting and reading the latest People, I knew they had stuff to do. And there was always a list of things to do when you're not busy, right? Every manager has that list somewhere. And nowadays it's much easier to get away with not sitting and reading the magazine and looking like you're not doing anything. People can just kind of silently be on their phones and be scrolling, and they slip it into the pocket when they're not looking. And I think it is much easier now to look busy. And not that all of our employees are doing that, but when you have an employee that is their go-to, rather than walking up front and saying, hey, what can I do? Or my op is empty. Do you want me to do something? Do you want me to help out so-and-so? That's a much better mindset. And I'd love to see that. But You're right, though. What we typically see is somebody just taking a breather in the back and scrolling and catching up on social media. And there's so much to do in the office. It's so weird. It's weird for me to think that that is now the norm. And I hear that from
Mhm.
managers all over, that I wish I could get them off their phones. And I don't think I have a good solution for it. I'm not in the office enough to have tried all these things, but I know you have 50 people in one location. Now, a lot of our people that are listening, they're managing less than that and maybe even over a couple locations. So I think the challenge for you is you turn a corner, you've got somebody just kind of sprinkled in a corner or something. So how often are you like going around and saying, walking around and seeing it, or is it just in your daily going around and looking to see like how are things operating? Your office is big. It's a big
Mhm.
footprint of an office. You got so much to do, but at some point a manager has to leave the office and start walking around to see if operations are actually operating, right? So how does that work for you? How do you manage that?
In terms of making sure that people are doing their job and what we expect to do, you do have to make sure that you have the time to not only do the work that you need to behind the scenes, but that you're also present in the working areas for your team to ensure it's like quality control. And we certainly have those people too that don't use the time as efficiently. And there's a few ways, that we address that. The very first thing that we do is that, our intent is to have a positive team experience just as much so as the patient experience. And I think that a lot of CE out there is really focused more on the patient side than it is on the team side. And I think that when you are a business that really stands for creating the best work environment for your team, that leads to engagement and it also leads to reciprocity. So ultimately, if you're treating me well and you're doing everything you can for me, I'm going to treat you well and do everything that I can for you. And so I think it starts there. The other thing is that it's society, it's the norm. And so we are
Mm-hmm.
going against the norm. So it's a way for us, especially, when I walk around and, I'll see maybe someone on their phone. And the first thing I do is I get curious because we do use our phone for a lot of different apps and a lot of programs and how we communicate to patients. So I don't just assume that they're doing something personal. My first
Mm-hmm.
assumption is, hey, I'm, just curious, just, what are you working on? And then a lot of times people will kind of see like, hey, I need to stay accountable. And they also know that it goes against their goals that they want to achieve. And
Yeah.
so when you want to make sure you have a good experience for your team, what goes into that is knowing what your team wants for themselves. What are their goals? What they want to create for themselves in their career. And how can I help them get to those things? And so if I see them doing actions that will go against them getting there, like certainly using their phones or not
Yeah.
being of value to the practice, then it's a conversation. But yeah, I have let people go that didn't get the memo and they weren't the fit for the practice. So people see that. And I think when you hold your team accountable, there's always somebody that's kind of like the example.
Yeah.
But
It's a good way of
team,
putting it.
yeah, the team then quickly responds. But you don't get rid of that 100%. It's just society. That's the societal norms.
Let me ask a logistics question here. So you have 50 employees. Does that include associates too, or are you talking about just people you manage? Okay, so you're the one, I'm assuming, that has to do performance reviews, or is that even divvied up by department? Because logistically, all of that, you're obviously not doing all at one time. You probably got it staggered. Can you walk us through, like, how do you make it so that you're not just overwhelmed with the HR part of your job, first of all. And then I want to get into other aspects, but just the HR part of managing 50 people is like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I'm cringing already thinking about it. So tell me how you do it.
Honestly, that's the hardest part, I think, for everybody is the people part.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
dentistry really in a dental business is the easiest part of the entire operation. As I grew and as our team grew, it required me to bring on more people to help with that for sure. So when we were a smaller practice, yeah, I did all the performance reviews and we actually do check ins. So we check in with every single team member every 3 months. It's not
Good.
just annual. So of course,
Yeah.
I had one or two check-ins and or reviews a week, and it was a lot, but it also was one of those important but not urgent things yet, if that makes sense. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like one of the most important things you can do is give your team time to learn what's beneficial to them and how they fit into your organization. It becomes urgent when you ignore all of that. And then all of a sudden there's this major fire that they have because they've been harboring or holding on to something that they haven't communicated for however long. So it is important to have that connection. I think one of the things that happens a lot of times that I see, for office managers is that people are afraid, they withhold their knowledge because they feel like that's what gives them value, and that if anyone else has that, now that person's competition, or that
Mm,
person's going to have my job, now I'm going to be replaced. And the opposite is true. And so,
yeah.
in order to grow and to really be successful, you want to surround yourself with the most knowledgeable team, with the
Mm-hmm.
highest performing team, people that add equal, if not more value, and you actually have a better experience at the same time. It's called being a multiplier, and there's a book, and I love this book. I recommend it to anybody. It's called Multipliers,
Okay.
and it's amazing. It goes through that process on how to be a multiplier versus a diminisher, and it gives you a lot of perspective. And certainly in the beginning, not that I had the mentality that if I give my knowledge away that something will be taken from me, but to a certain extent, I think that's how I thought business operated, is that there
Yeah.
was always somebody, the office manager or the person in charge was the best and outshined everyone else.
Yeah.
And actually, our job is to make sure everybody else shines, if not
Absolutely.
brighter.
Would you like to hear more? Follow the link for the full episode.